Hi, this is Les and Amy from the RevGenetics podcast. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies. Today, we are looking at a really cool 2025 study about a natural plant extract called berberine. We are going to explore how this ancient natural remedy actually helped tiny worms live nearly 30% longer.
Yeah, and to set the stage here, this research comes out of a science team over at Gillen University. They use these tiny microscopic worms for the study. And I know it sounds a bit weird to study aging in worms, but their aging process is actually, well, it's surprisingly similar to ours.
Right, which makes them the perfect little test subjects. So the big problem they were looking at is just how our cells break down over time. It is basically cellular rust. Over time, our cells take on damage, this rust builds up, and the cell just stops working.
Exactly. And, scientists have been obsessing over all these experimental, heavy-duty anti-aging drugs to try to clean up that rust.
Yeah.
Things you might hear about in the news.
Yeah.
But a lot of those drugs have some pretty rough side effects. They can mess with your stomach or even weaken your immune system.
Which is why this study is so exciting. Berberine isn't some brand new lab chemical. It is a natural extract from plants that people have safely used for thousands of years. So the researchers basically asked, what happens if we give this safe, natural plant extract to these worms?
And the results were, they were just massive. When they gave the worms the perfect exact dose of berberine, they lived 27.3% longer.
Nearly 30%. That is incredible. But wait, I have to ask,
Yeah.
more isn't always better, right? Like, what if they just gave them a ton of it?
Oh, that is the really fascinating part. They actually tried doubling the dose. And when they gave them way too much, the worms only lived about 14% longer. So it's a total Goldilocks situation.
So it has to be just right.
Exactly. Just enough to wake up the body's defense systems, but not so much that it overwhelms them.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because living longer is great, but not if you just feel terrible for that extra time. Did this extract actually improve their quality of life?
It really did. The researchers tested their movement by putting them in little drops of water to see how much they wriggled around. And the ones given berberine were way more active. They were basically swimming around like much younger worms.
But sometimes in these tests, animals live longer just because the treatment makes them lose their appetite, right? Like, they just eat less, and that starvation makes them live longer.
Right, that happens a lot. But they actually measured how much the worms were eating, and it was exactly the same as the normal worms. They ate the same amount, they grew to the same size, and they had normal families. They just lived longer and healthier without any downsides.
That is so cool. And they even looked at that cellular rust we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah, they put them under these special glowing microscopes. When cells get old and rusty, they build up this toxic trash that actually glows blue under the light. The normal worms were just glowing blue, full of this garbage. But the ones that had the berberine, they were practically clean.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. Surviving a long time in a cozy, perfect lab is one thing, but they actually put these poor little worms through a total gauntlet, didn't they?
No, they tortured them. First, they cranked up the heat. They put them in an environment that was way too hot for them, which is usually deadly. But the worms on berberine had a survival rate that was 24% higher.
Wow. And then they exposed them to a toxic weed killer, right? Something that causes a massive amount of that cellular rust instantly.
Exactly. It's a brutal test. The normal worms crashed super fast, but the ones that ate the berberine fought it off for significantly longer. Overall, the berberine dropped that damaging cellular rust by almost 40%. It built like an invisible armor against extreme stress.
And a quick, huge thanks to RevGenetics for supporting our journey into science.
They have a really fantastic long-term focus on evidence-based natural compounds for aging research.
You can actually find high-quality berberine right in their lineup of supplements.
It is so great having a sponsor that directly connects to the exact cellular research we love to explore.
Okay, so let's get into the how. How does a simple plant extract pull the levers inside a tiny worm to build this armor?
So every living thing has this main energy control system. The scientists found that if a worm was missing the genes for that specific control system, the berberine did absolutely nothing. It needs that system to work.
So it is kind of like the berberine is sending a very specific message to a manager inside the cell.
That is a perfect way to put it. The researchers actually watched these little microscopic factory managers physically move into the cell's control room.
And once the manager is in the control room, what orders are they giving?
They are hitting the big red alarm button. They start cranking up the production of the cell's natural protective shields. These are special defenses that neutralize the rust, detoxify the cell, and protect other parts of the cell from melting under heat stress.
It is amazing that scientists can literally watch a plant compound tell a cell to build its own shields. But they didn't just look at a couple of managers, they looked at the entire instruction manual of the worm, right?
Yeah, they looked at all the genetic instructions at once, and they found that berberine turned up the dial on over 250 different helpful instructions.
And one of the biggest upgrades was to the cell's recycling plants, which completely explains why they were so good at clearing out all that blue glowing trash we talked about earlier.
Exactly. But the most surprising find was how it changed their fat burning.
Really? Like, it changed how they use fat.
Totally. As we age, our bodies get really bad at managing and using stored fat for energy. But the berberine turned up all the instructions for organizing and burning fat. It gave the worms this incredible energy balance, which is probably how they had the fuel to fight off all that intense heat and toxic stress.
So if we step back and look at the big picture for you, the listener, the big takeaway is that this isn't a magic trick hitting just one button. It is doing a whole bunch of good things all at once. It boosts the shields, takes out the cellular trash, and optimizes how the body burns fat.
Right. But we definitely have to do a quick reality check here.
Always important.
These are tiny worms. They are not humans. The leap from a microscopic worm to a person is huge. We need lots of advanced human testing to map out exactly how this translates to us.
But the massive advantage here is that berberine is completely natural. It has a proven safety record going back thousands of years. It is incredibly promising compared to all these brand new experimental lab drugs.
Absolutely. It's a very safe starting point.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over today. If a natural compound that has been sitting around for thousands of years can reprogram a worm's defense network to live 30% longer, what other ancient traditional remedies are just sitting in plain sight, waiting for modern science to unlock them? We might be looking at a future where our best anti-aging tools are just biological software updates downloaded directly from nature.
We hope you found our discussion of the published study interesting.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.